But with an increased focus on sustainability, we're seeing more and more people, and especially as, I hate to say it, but younger generations come into the industry, it's almost like in the environmental aspect of retreading and sustainability is more important to them as individuals. And so it comes up in the conversation more and more.
Hello and welcome everyone to this brand new episode of the Auto Tech Show. My name is Mark Babin, and as always, it's great to welcome you to this episode. Thank you so very much for being here. And what an episode we have for you today as we talk about tire retreading. It's a topic that has come up in episodes past, but today we explore it in depth. We all know that the key to fleet success over the next decade, with changing regulations and rising costs, will be sustainable fleet management. And on this show, we are looking at one specific way fleets can attain sustainability, that is, of course, through tire retreading. So with that said, this episode is a deep dive into the environmental and economic benefits of tire retreading. We'll be tackling this topic today through the eyes and insights of a veteran in the field, the Managing Director at Tire Retread and Repair Information Bureau, David Stevens. The Tire Retread and Repair Information Bureau, which we'll refer to as TRIB from now on, is a non-profit industry association founded in 1974 whose goal is to provide the motoring public, both private and public sectors, with the most up-to-date information about the economic and environmental benefits of tire retreading and tire repairing. David has been in this role as Managing Director with TRIB since 2010 and comes from a massively successful career at several Fortune 100 companies in the US, Japan, and the United Kingdom. David, thank you so very much for your time today. It's one incredible introduction reading through and researching you for this episode. So I really appreciate your time today and your future insights. So yeah, first and foremost, thank you for being here.
Mark, thanks for the opportunity. I look forward to any chance I get to talk about retreading because it's something I'm really passionate about. And it's, as you stated, it's something that's very beneficial for the industry overall.
And it's something that we hear coming up in conversation, I think, more and more. Do you find that over the past while that you've seen this is something more and more companies are having to invest interest in and talk more about?
Well, the interesting thing about retreading, and as you mentioned, I've been doing this for the past 14 years. And I think the mission of TRIB is really twofold: to promote the industry and also defend it against any sort of negative, either legislation or battling some of those perceptions that I think we'll talk about a bit later. But I've seen a shift over those 14 years. And obviously, retreading has always been very environmentally friendly. But with an increased focus on sustainability, we're seeing more and more people, and especially as, I hate to say it, but younger generations come into the industry, it's almost like in the environmental aspect of retreading and sustainability is more important to them as individuals. And so it comes up in the conversation more and more. And we're actually starting to see in some of the RFPs that get issued from fleets and companies that are looking to buy tires, they're asking people that are bidding on these RFPs, tell us about your sustainability metrics. And so obviously retreading can be a huge component in that and sort of push people over the edge in terms of benefits of that RFP.
Really interesting. That's an interesting way to think about it because, yeah, it is obviously a huge sustainability step forward and it is a good option for those people. Now, you mentioned there that I think for some, maybe those less educated on tire retreading, those who haven't looked into it for their fleets or are not close to even taking that step yet. I think tire retreading often carries a stigma related to safety and performance compared to, like, say, a brand new set of tires. Mm-hmm. So to start us off with a bit of context, and you just kind of touched on it there, what would you say to those who still carry that stigma with them when it comes to tire retreading?
Yeah, it is still a challenge that we face, and it's an interesting because it really divides in the industry based upon the size of customer that you're talking about. So in the US, around 87% of fleets that have 100 or more trucks use retreading in their operations. And the reason that they do that is, if you think about these bigger fleets that are able to constantly test, have a very robust tire management program, and they're tracking their costs down to the fraction of a penny for their entire operation, not just tires. But these guys know that retreading has the best return on investment and the lowest total cost of ownership. So they've determined over years and years of testing that buying a quality new tire that can be retreaded multiple times and then retreading that tire at various positions within their fleet gives them the biggest bang for their buck. And I think as you start to move down in size into those smaller fleets or individual owner operators who maybe don't have the ability to do all of that testing or to have an inventory of tires there, it becomes more of an issue where some of those perceptions about, and misperceptions really, that retreading is not as reliable, it's not as safe. And it's just not true. And, there have been in the U.S. Multiple studies done both at the state and the federal level. And it's interesting because the beginning of those studies, at least at the state level, came about because a particular state wanted to ban retreaded tires. And this again goes to one of the very big misconceptions that we have. So people see tread rubber on the side of the road, and they believe that is coming from retreaded tires. And so, if you're in a state, and one of the states that did it was Arizona. And so if your constituents as a politician are seeing all this rubber on the side of the roads, or they might hit it and it damages their car, and they call that congressman or congresswoman and says, we need to ban retreaded tires. And so they undertook a study within the state of Arizona, and they examined, the pieces of rubber on the road and whether it was from retreaded tires. And we've also done this at the federal level. And what was determined is that the rubber on the side of the roads comes from new tires and retreaded tires in equal proportion. And it has to do with the tires being run underinflated, overloaded, they have an improper repair, or they're abused in some other way, or they hit other debris on the highway already, pick up an injury, and then those tires can fail. So all 5 of those studies that I mentioned, at the conclusion of those studies, where they were hoping to find information so they could ban retreads, they actually recommended that more retreads be used in state governments. Incredible. And saying basically, these are great from an economic standpoint, an environmental standpoint, and we should actually be purchasing more retreaded tires. So, not only is the science backs it up, the data backs it up in terms of the economic and environmental benefits, but also the quality tire manufacturers back these tires up with warranties. So if you buy a premium new commercial truck tire, it will often come with a 2, 3, or more retread warranty because they specifically designed the casings to be retreaded multiple times. And this is where we have a real issue with what we call low quality, low cost imported tires who don't have any guarantee of quality or retreadability. And so those one and done tires that come in with support, financial support from various Asian governments, end up going, into the waste stream almost immediately because they can't be retreaded. So you buy that tire and you might not even get you're definitely not going to get the miles you would have gotten out of a quality premium tire. And then it basically just goes into the recycling stream or straight into landfill. And so if you think about all the natural resources that are being wasted in a process where you have a one and done tire versus a tire that is going to be retreaded multiple times. So I think there is that perception, and especially so circling back to those smaller fleets, they have, if they're looking to make a tire purchase, sometimes it's down to, well, okay, how much cash do I have on hand? How much cash do I have in my pocket for an owner operator? And they look and they see, well, I could buy this cheap Asian tire, which is a new tire for X, or I could get a retread And then their perception is that, well, that new tire is always going to be better than a retread, but it's simply not the case. Yeah. And that's why, the data from the big fleets and from these studies that have happened in the US really support retreading.
So it really sounds like the work's gone into, like these reports you mentioned, the work's gone into finding the truth and really removing bias and removing opinion, getting fact on paper. And here's the information, which is great in that Arizona case that's swapped their opinion about it because of facts. But regardless of what's produced, there will always be these non-believers, these misconceptions that will continue to exist. Is it just a matter of education at that point to dispel a lot of those concerns? Is it just continuous education, or what else do you feel has to be done?
Yeah, and I think this goes back to, I talked about the promote and defend side of what we do. And when I first started 14 years ago, almost on a daily basis, we were really doing the defend side of things. So there was a negative press article, a negative TV news segment on rubber on the roads, state legislative bodies that wanted to introduce legislation that was against the retread industry. So we were very much focused on how do we defend the industry against these misconceptions. And I think over time, and thankfully, and I wish, hopefully we can take some credit for this, but we have moved very much into the promotion side of the retread industry, because I don't see on a daily or a weekly basis those same negative stories in even social media or press or TV or even on a legislative standpoint. So I feel like we've been doing everything we can to educate people about it. The battle is not won by any stretch of the imagination. And we spend a lot of time at trade shows talking to these smaller fleets and individual owner operators. And sometimes I liken it to hand-to-hand combat. So if we can have a conversation with one person that's standing across from us, and then we can change their mind, and then hopefully when they're at the truck stop having a coffee, talking to someone else, they can help change their mind. And we almost view it that way. We're doing the broad brushstrokes of webinars, videos, training, education through our website and through, speaking engagements as well. But it's also down to those changing the minds of those individuals who hopefully then can help influence other individuals.
Because ultimately they want what's best for their fleet, for their operations. And so they need to, I'm sure they're welcoming the truth more or less. Like, it's not so much of a heated argument, right? When you're having these talks, especially in person, it's really a learning opportunity for you to share some facts maybe that they don't know, or maybe more of that environmental impact on a bigger picture for them.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that's one of the things I've seen evolve over time as well. We do a massive truck show here in the U.S. in Louisville, Kentucky, and it's called the Mid-America Truck Show. It's the biggest truck show in the U.S., and we've had a booth there for years. And one of the things that we do is we have a Spot the Retreads contest. And we put, 8 to 12 tires, commercial truck tires, side by side in our booth, some new, some retreaded. And we have attendees come up and see if they can tell which is a new tire and which is a retreaded tire. And
awesome.
What we found is that over 80% of the people can't tell the difference. And so it obviously that's a cosmetic thing, but it starts a conversation about the quality manufacturing process that goes into retreading. And it opens up a bigger dialogue with them about how retreaded tires are manufactured, the quality aspect of them, and why they're beneficial for them. And the reason I mention that is because we still have these individual owner operators that come up to us and say, they have their doubts about retreading. And one of my favorite interactions was there were two gentlemen standing in front of me, and they had just done the contest. And one guy said, well, you know what, and he missed almost all the tires, but he was an expert, right? And he said, I would never use retreaded tires. And the guy standing next to him just turned and looked at him, and he's like, you're an idiot. And just, and these are strangers, right? These are not buddies. And I was like, okay, what's about to happen here? And the one guy who said that, he's like, look, I'm an individual owner operator. I can't do tire testing. I don't have, like I said before, I can't keep an inventory of tires around for myself. He's like, but what I do do is I look at what the big fleets are doing. So he's like, I think UPS, and I'll use it because he said that as an example, whatever UPS does in terms of speccing their tires and their, repair and tire methodology, that's what I follow as an individual, because I know
Interesting.
that they manage, thousands of tires, and
Yeah.
what the decisions that they're making is based on the data that they have. And so I feel very confident that I can make my same decisions based upon their data. And I think it was great to hear that, because, and he's like, and I've never regretted that decision in my life, because I've reduced my tire costs, I've increased my efficiency, and I've never had a problem with any retreaded tire that I used. And so those are still sort of the conversations that we have to have on an individual basis.
Really interesting. That's got to be the most fascinating thing to see happen. Well, if we ever show up to this show, I want to come and see some of these interactions as well, because you don't know whether to step in as a referee or just let the situation unfold.
Yes. Thankfully, there was a set of tires between me and them, so in case anything happens.
Yeah. Just build a wall of truck tires. Absolutely.
Exactly.
This is fantastic to see. So you touched on some of those environmental impacts, and I think that's where obviously we want to have the core of the conversation today. And I really like the examples you gave with how, reducing waste and the lower carbon footprint that you mentioned as well. Comparing manufacturing of new tires when you look at a raw material base and an energy use base, how does that stack up compared to retreading when we look at the specific numbers and figures?
Yeah, I think, so I came from outside the tire industry, so I was not familiar with how tires were manufactured. And I probably had the same level of understanding that most people do. Like, a tire is round and black, and it helps, support our cars and trucks and made of rubber. There are over 200 individual components that go into the manufacture of a tire. And so if you think about all of the sourcing that has to go, whether it's natural rubber, all the chemicals that go into it, steel belts for radial tires, silica, carbon black, antioxidants. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So if you take all of those inputs and all of the extraction work that needs to happen, all of the water that needs to go into feeding those natural resources, and if you're able to take 70% of the tire and all of those components that have already been manufactured and put into the tire and reuse it as a retread, then, without anything else, right there, you have massive environmental savings. So we often talk about, and then on top of it, and then this is multiple times, right? So even with that first retread, you have achieved massive environmental savings. But then if, your second, your third, and depending on the application, so for instance, trash collection, waste, those types of tires, which are running over curbs or going into the dump to drop off their stuff, they're picking up injuries, but they're not, the tires aren't getting really old, so they can be repaired, but they're wearing down the tread, and so they can be retreaded. And some of those tires are retreaded, 8-10 times. And if you think about, if you had to replace all of those tires with a brand new tire every single time, it's just, the numbers rack up really quickly. And so carbon emission savings, just the rubber plants themselves, the trees, all of those raw inputs immediately saved from a retreading standpoint. And the retreading plants themselves are also because these guys most of them have been in business for quite a long time. They believe in the environmental aspect of it, and they operate their retread plants in environmentally sustainable ways as well. So every single thing that is used in the plant gets collected and recycled. So when you buff off the old tread of the tires that come into the plant, they collect all of those buffings. They get vacuumed out of the plant and stored in a trailer, which is then picked up by a tire recycling company and then turned into rubber mats, playground materials, rubber mulch, etc. but same thing with everything that comes in, the pallets, the cardboard. They use LED efficient lighting, which is motion sensitive. Many of them operate with solar power. As well. So they're taking their environmental benefits that are within the tire itself and translating it through their entire operation within a retread plant. So, from a sustainability standpoint, I mean, retreading has always been green, and we just continue to improve upon our environmental metrics every single year, really.
And I think that gets more important, and we're going to touch on the regulation side a little bit later on, but as regulation changes, it seems like this is even more important to be reusing a lot of what's being done. And it sounds like these multiple retreads, these premium tires that can handle multiple retreads just is going to have a huge long-term effect. So we'll definitely get into that a little bit later. I wanted to touch on the economic side of this, because again, we did kind of touch on the cost savings you can have when you look at getting maybe a cheap one tire and then having to get a new tire every time versus this retreading stage multiple times. There seems to be this triangle effect when we look at fleet tires, and this is, I guess, general for any kind of automotive thing, but you have the cost, you have safety, and you have performance. And usually the traditional thing is you kind of get to pick two. When we look at the retreading side of it, cutting costs is going to be important for every fleet manager, but they'd have to balance that with obviously the performance of the vehicle and the performance of that fleet and that truck, and maintaining the safest vehicle possible for the roadways, for their drivers, for uptime and everything. Mm-hmm. How does the retreading side really encapsulate all three of those elements?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is one of the unique aspects of retreading, because you don't have to make sacrifices with any part of those if you choose retreading. Right. Now, I mean, the U.S. is unique because a lot of the retreading is concentrated in the hands of a few big players, and most of those big players also have new tire operations. So this is the first side of it where you could, and I'll just pick a brand. So if you are a loyal Bridgestone customer and you know that this particular Bridgestone tire spec'd on your fleet for the type of operation you have with this tread design in this position, let's say a drive position, works well for you. And you can then work with Bandag, the retread side of Bridgestone's operations, and they will often have the exact same tread design, the same rubber compound in a retread that you can then use in that same position. So you're taking advantage of the investment that Bridgestone has made in that new tire casing, and you found that it's worked for you in that position, and then you're able to translate it directly into using a retread of that. So you get almost identical performance, safety, reliability, but you're saving money on that as well. And I think that holds true even if you talk about independent retreaders that may not have an affiliation, or even if you take a Michelin casing and put a Goodyear retread on it. I mean, the investments in the casings themselves and the performance of them can be supported by the investments that have gone into technology for retreading and the tread designs as well. So, I think a lot of fleets are focused or are increasingly focused on low rolling resistance tires, right, to help them with fuel economy. Yep. And that's one of those latest misconceptions about retreading, is that you can't get a low rolling resistance tire in a retread. Well, you can. We have several SmartWay verified low rolling resistance treads, so that you can also, on top of the environmental benefits of choosing retreading, you're going to be able to achieve low rolling resistance if that's important to you and your fleet. So, you have those initial 30 to 50% cost savings just purchasing a retreaded tire compared to a comparable new tire. And then if you retread it multiple times, you're going to get up to 500% more mileage than you would have gotten out of a one and done new tire, low quality tire.
Is that really then, if we look at the short term, the short term benefits seem obvious. You save that 30, 40%, as you mentioned, on doing that retread and kind of equipping your fleet for that success path. From a long-term perspective, in a fleet management operation, 5-10 years, Are there other big advantages from an economic point of view that fleets can look forward to by sort of making that initial decision and investment on day one?
Yeah, I wanted to, and I pulled up because I want to make sure I get the numbers exactly right. So I pulled up something I often
Absolutely.
talk about when I give presentations, and this is an actual fleet example with one of our TRIB member companies. And so this fleet, and goes back to 2018 and 19. In 2018, they used 12,000 new tires and almost 27,000 retreaded tires. So this is a big fleet, but their retread ratio to new tire ratio was 2.2 retreads to 1 new tire, and they came in talked to our TRIB member and said, look, they were interested in two things. One, they wanted to increase their cost savings, and they were also interested in the environmental impact of their tire decisions. And they said, we want to, over the next year, we want to increase the rate of retreading that we use in our operation. So they worked with this partner to help do that. And so in 2019, they bought 9,000 new tires and 34,000 retreaded tires. So that lifted their retread to new ratio to 3.8 to 1 new tire. So not quite double in terms of their retread ratio. So in a single year, this one fleet making that change saved over $4.2 million. So 1 year with one set of retreads. And so if you multiply that out over a number of years, you're talking, obviously, I mean, $4 million is a significant number on its own, but if you just keep that going, obviously it can be a big number regardless of the size of your fleet. And then they also measured, like I said, they were interested in the environmental aspect. So they saved over 1.5 million kilograms of CO2. So big carbon emission reductions by making those decisions. They saved over 237,000 gallons of oil through the manufacturing process compared to a retreaded tire to a new tire. And they kept out of landfill an additional 18,000 tires because by increasing their retreading rate, they're obviously keeping more tires out of landfill. So those are some very specific examples of what can happen for a fleet, both in the short term on an annual basis, but then obviously translating it out to out years for them as well.
Those are incredible numbers, especially when you compound them over years. The life cycle of that original tire. It seems like the numbers would just be absolutely undeniable. We talk about these misconceptions that still exist, and I'm sure there's some that you may just pull your hair out with some of them. You have numbers like this. How is it even a conversation anymore with people? And how do these myths still exist?
Yeah, I think that's it. I'm surprised that I still have hair, quite frankly, because, and we have those conversations over and over again. And when I go to these trucking shows, I sort of do have to steel myself to be prepared for it. But thankfully, we are starting to see the conversations shift a little bit, and we are having, and again, I'll say it, I mean, it's, some of these drivers that are just entering the workforce, and they'll come up and they're like, I heard about retreading. Like, can you tell me more about it? Like, I'm interested in the environmental aspect of it. Also, I'm a new driver. I'm trying to get off the ground. Like, how do I save money? So can you tell me more about it? And they don't come with some of these misconceptions about it. And so we can start to help educate them before I think they get poisoned by people who still hold on to some of these really negative misconceptions, which are all inaccurate,
Yeah, and it is a little bit of thing within automotive. We see some people who just won't change and just refuse to change no matter how many proof points or case studies point otherwise. And I think that's the frustrating part, and that's what makes someone go crazy. And so, as you mentioned, these are probably conversations you have at the end of the day, and you just go, what did I just talk about?
Right.
But it just seems like there will always be that group of people within all areas of automotive. We see it. I'm sure you see it as well. But ultimately, you are seeing that needle move, and I think that's a positive thing. Is there a specific element that you think has caused that needle to move and those conversations to start to happen, or has it been a slow progression and a slow education over the last years?
It definitely hasn't been overnight. And so like if I go back 14 years, I mean, we have been doing this, and I would say our TRIB members, the big manufacturers of tires have done a great job as well as educating fleets. Like, there are individual salespeople that are out there having the conversations. And, it is not an easy sell. I know it is a lot easier just to sell a new tire, right? But they are taking that extra step and one of my customers I visited it was probably about 8 or 9 years ago. And he said, and he had been in the tire industry for 30 or 40 years. And he said, when I first started, we sold a tire. We sold a new tire, and and then we would bring people in, and, maybe there was other stuff that we could do for them. He's like, now we sell an entire portfolio of services. It's not just about the tire. It's the new tire, it's the retread, it's service, it's data management, it's, all of these things that go into how can we service the needs of those customers beyond just selling them a tire. And I think that's, the tire manufacturers, along with the retreaders, have done a good job. Also, I'll pat ourselves on the back. I think that the educational efforts that we've done has helped with that. But it's, we couldn't do it on our own. It's the manufacturers also doing a great job from a marketing standpoint of helping people and potential customers learn about the benefits of retreading.
It's true. Yeah, I had an episode I did with a gentleman at Bridgestone at TMC in New Orleans this past year. And he took no time to bring up their retreading program, as you also brought up as well. It seems like it's a main focus for manufacturers, as it should be, given the sustainability changes and the regulation side of it, which is what I wanted to touch on next. There's a lot of regulatory changes that are happening here in Europe, especially over the next years. I know there's a big regulation change about to take place in the US, and there will be more and more. How does that change and challenge what you've built up from an education point of view, from a case study point of view? Does it affect anything you do directly?
Well, I think and my hope, and this is some of the things that we're working on, is that it only affects us in very positive ways.
Of course.
Because of the environmental aspect of retreading. And as fleets and governments, whether it's at the federal level or the state or local or county, as sustainability metrics become increasingly important to them, while cost savings remain a critical component of what they do, it will only help retreading. And I think, to be honest with you, I am a bit surprised about some of the activities in Europe, because I've always felt that Europe was a little bit ahead of the U.S. in terms of focused on environmental metrics and sustainability and helping support companies that are delivering environmental positives based upon their products or services that they offer. And I think, retreading is really being hurt in Europe from these low quality, low cost Asian imports, which are having a detrimental environmental impact. And I wish there was more sort of government regulatory support for the retreading industry in Europe and around the world. And I think that's what we're hopeful will come out of some of the efforts that we're making here in the U.S. So, there's some other tire industry organizations, the USTMA and TIA, that are focused on helping to support the new tire industry and the retail side of things and training. And one of the pieces of legislation that was introduced this year is a retread tax credit for customers that buy retreaded tires. And I don't think anything will happen this year in an election year, but hopefully next year, this is something that might progress. And I think there are other things that we're looking at in terms of, so I go back to that mention of RFP, where you have sustainability metrics that are included in that. And I think that federal, state, and local governments, there should be some requirements that say, look, if you're making a tire purchase decision, you need to look at the economics of that, but you also need to look at the environmental impact of that. And I think if we could increase the adoption of environmental metrics in RFPs and also in purchasing requirements within governments, I think that would have a big impact for the industry as well. we're doing a
Absolutely.
decent job with the fleets, and because the fleets, I mean the private fleets, because they have sustainability metrics also within their companies that they want to hit. So whether it's looking at alternative fuels, should we have a fleet of electric vehicles? How do we make our trucks as aerodynamic as possible? There's all these other investments in terms of reducing their carbon footprint. And meanwhile, one of the biggest costs that they have is tires, and they could also have some of the biggest environmental impact by making sure they're using retreading in their operations as well.
So the answer to a lot of the problems you're looking to solve is already right in front of them and already readily available, it sounds like.
Right. Yes. Yeah. The story, and like you said, like once you're presented with all of this data and this information, it's hard to see why you wouldn't make this decision to help support the industry, the retreading industry. And it's
Until it
a
becomes
very
obvious. Yeah.
local business, right? These are, you have to be geographically close to your customers. So retreading, and I'll use the US as an example, is very widely geographically distributed across the US. So you're supporting jobs within your country and within your state and within your local environment to help, support your local economy while also benefiting, having the benefits of cost savings and the environmental aspects as well.
Yeah, the benefits really trickle down to a lot of different people and industries and organizations. And I think that's an important thing to mention as well. To kind of wrap things up and bring things full circle, I wanted to ask your thoughts about the future of retreading. Obviously, you had to jump into the industry. You learned a lot, and the last 14 years have just been, it sounds like one dynamic roller coaster. Looking to the future with how fast technology continues to evolve, and we see the integration of AI and virtual development with tires, much of what we touched on today and a little bit of the benefits as well. What are you personally excited to see when it comes to the future of retreading? And is it something we should all be really excited for?
Yeah, I think, I am incredibly bullish about and positive about the future of the retread industry. And I think it's because the strength of the story that we have to tell, both from a cost and environmental benefits standpoint, but it's also about the way that the industry continues to evolve. So as I said, the first time I went into a retread plant, not having any experience with it whatsoever, I was amazed at the number of touches that in the retreading process. So there is a lot of human involvement in the retreading process, and I think some of the investment as companies are getting bigger, there is an increasing look at, well, are there ways that we can automate this process? And where can we make smart investments in robotics and automation, both in terms of an efficiency standpoint and productivity, but also in consistent quality as well, depending on what section of the retreading process that this automation happens in. And the companies that have done that, and I think this is an important point about the retread industry, is that many of these were started as family businesses. And even if they are, massive companies, they still treat their employees as family members. And when there has been automation within retread plants, it hasn't been about, well, let's reduce the number of headcount we have. Let's find out how we can do this better and still protect our employees and keep them an integral part of what we do as an operation. So I think automation is a key component of what will happen in the future with the retread industry. And with, the same as a lot of industries, not just in the US, but around the world, we are struggling to find people and keep and train them. So if you have some options for automation, that also helps with some of the, we do an annual survey with our members, and we ask them, what are your biggest concerns that you face as a company? And the biggest concern that has come up in my individual conversations and what we see in our survey results is finding, training, and keeping good people within their operation. And so that is, if there's ways that they can sort of release that pressure, they will do that. I think one of the other things is that you mentioned AI, and this is one of the things that a lot of people don't understand about the retreading process, is that those tires before they come out of the retreading process, go through multiple inspection points, from initial inspection when they come into the plant, through going through non-destructive testing or chirography machines, all the way to a final inspection. And a lot of tires get rejected because they don't meet the quality standards of a retreader. So I think that's one of those misconceptions that people say, well, every tire that comes into a retread plant, they just slap a new tread on it and they go out, and then but it's an incredibly detailed manufacturing process, which includes a lot of components of inspection. And one of those is the chirography machine, which basically is like an X-ray machine, which can look inside the tire and see any damage that might be, undetected by the naked eye. And, I think that that's a huge opportunity for AI, because you still have a trained individual that is looking at images and determining if there's any damage. And I know that in research and testing they've done within the cancer detection industry, is that they've had some very positive initial results teaching an AI to look at cancer, to look at imagery and determine if there's cancer within that image. And they also, so they have a higher rate of positive identification of potential cancer cells and a lower rate of false negatives. And so I think there are some opportunities within the retreading industry for AI introduction into the retreading process. And then the last thing I'll mention is just, everyone talks about data capture, and how companies are using data. And when tires come into a retread plant, they get a barcode attached to them. They're scanned. Yep. And I think the retreaders have an opportunity to take a lot of that tire information and then share it with their customers and help them make decisions about not only their tires, but potentially their drivers. Is there, or maintenance issues that show up with a particular truck that might not be identified? Because if the same truck is wearing tires really quickly or wearing them irregularly, is there something going on with that truck, or is there something the way that the driver's driving? Is it route specific? So there's a lot of data capture that can happen in the retread industry in the future that can then be shared with their members. And then the last thing I wanted to mention, two things. Tires, they will lose air pressure over time. So there's a lot of investments that fleets make in terms of TPMS, monitoring systems, or automated inflation systems. A lot of the tire manufacturers are developing non-pneumatic tire options. So if you have a tire that doesn't have air in it and doesn't have that degrading through the loss of air, and those tires can be retreaded, you're talking about increasing the rates of retreading with those specific tires. So that's another potential future option for the retread industry. And then the last one I'll mention is that the growth of electric vehicles. So with the added weight that comes from having a battery, which is much heavier than the internal combustion engine, and the increased torque that comes from those electric vehicles, you're putting more pressure on the tires from a wear standpoint with that weight and that increased torque. So the tires are going to wear faster, which a lot of EV owners are discovering, surprising to themselves in terms of how quickly they need to replace their tires. So as EVs continued adoption within the trucking industry or other fleets that are using tires, it creates some more opportunities for retreading, because those treads are going to wear much faster, and the tires are not going to, they're going to be good candidates for retreading. And so there's another opportunity for increasing and retreading.
And more reason to look down that road, especially when we look at all the cost savings and the expenditures that are going to have to happen in the next years, given all these new infrastructures and new vehicles and all of this stuff as well. So more emphasis on being able to save with the retreading program as well.
Yes.
Amazing. I love that we can clearly this is something you have a passion for. You could talk about it forever. And I love you keep throwing these misconceptions in. It sounds like you could write a book just of misconceptions on tire retreading. And I look forward to the first copy of that one when it comes out. But David, listen, this has been fantastic. there's been a few episodes that I've really thoroughly enjoyed learning about something I had very little, if not no knowledge on before. And retreading is certainly one of them. So I can see how it's an addicting subject to get into. Just listening to you talk about it has been really, really a treat for me. So thank you so much for that. And I hope the audience gets as much out of it as well and takes a little bit away. I think there's lots to take away on this episode. But yeah, again, thank you so very much for everything, all your insights today and your time. This has been, one of my favorite episodes. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Mark. It's like I said at the outset, I always look forward to an opportunity to talk about it. And I think that, one thing I would encourage people to do is, if you wanted to better understand the retreading process, if you go to TRIB's website, which is retread.org, we have videos. We have a plant tour video and an environmental benefits of retreading video. But I think that's one of the things that you asked me about, convincing people to try retreading. Nothing convinces people faster than going and touring through a retread plant, because they can see the process itself, and they can see how detailed it is. They can see the inspection that goes into it, and they have an understanding of what it is versus the perceptions they had before they went in. So thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you and talk about retreading.
Yeah, and I definitely think those resources, just going through your site, those resources are fantastic, and it allows people to, like you said, go to the locations, learn a little bit more, and start to have conversations that move that needle together just a little bit more. So I'll definitely make that available for our listeners. But yeah, once again, David, thank you so much for today.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Thank you so much.
And to everyone watching and listening on this episode of the Auto Tech Show, wow, thank you so very much for joining me. Tons to take away, and maybe you're going to be thinking about retreading just that little bit more for the rest of the day and the rest of your week, as you should. So definitely head down to the podcast notes below. You'll see information with TRIB's website, the retread.org, as well as contact. I'll put my contact down there, as well as for David on LinkedIn. You can reach out, ask questions, keep the conversation going, and let's continue this educational phase when it comes to this important topic when we look at the sustainability movement and the economic benefits that come from retreading. So thank you all so very much for joining me. This has been a great episode. I wish you the very best day wherever in the world you may be, and I'll see you on the next episode very soon. Bye for now.